Hello everyone, I'm Rayton and this is episode 5 of season 2 of my Revolution 3 Let's Play. As you can see, I'm once again in front of my industrial greenhouse, the one I built over the last few episodes, and I think it's time to actually start doing something useful with the stuff that's growing in here. However, for that we're first going to need some wool, because the way I'm planning to do it is going to require quite a bit of it. On a side note, this is the first episode where I'm adding the voice stuff after the fact, because it turned out that by this point the voices had gotten so very soft that it was just not usable at all. So, going forward, this is probably how I'm gonna do it. We'll see how well it works. With all of that said though, let's get started and round us up some sheep, shall we? Alright, here I am in an ender forest, with a bunch of leads, ready to catch myself some sheep. The reason why I need wool? Pretty simple. I want to use some conduits from Ender.io to route items and liquids around. The problem with that is that in this mod pack, conduit binders require wool to be made. The silicon isn't as much of a problem. Just throw some sand in a sag mill and you've got yourself plenty before you know it. Getting the wool, that's actually the more tricky part here. Anyway, I've already set up a holding pen for the sheep back at the home base, and, well, all I gotta do now is make it back with these unruly sheep all the way to my home. Yeah, wish me luck here, please. One relatively short trip later and I finally got all 4 of these unruly sheep on the way to their holding pen. Now, the reason why I had the fences like this is because the theory is that they'd all just walk in like that, but as you can already see, one of them had other plans. Well, for a little while anyway. So, with that said, all I gotta do is just grab the leads, and then it's just a matter of getting out of the pen I've got myself stuck in, and I can start making myself the next bit of tooling I am going to need for this project. It's really just a pair of shears that won't break over time, because, hey, mana steel is really, really powerful in this mod pack. So yeah, I'm just going to gather up some wool off screen, hopefully not get in too much trouble, and I'll be back. So, in addition to my mana steel shears, I also made myself a ring of magnetization, shown here, which is just a very convenient way of grabbing stuff that's just out of reach of your character. Now, the thing about it is that it picks up everything that's laying on the ground, so I'll have to make sure not to wear it inside my greenhouse, because otherwise I'll end up pulling all the canola seeds that get harvested into my inventory, and I'll have to deal with that mess. Anyway, now that I finally have that, grabbing the wool from the sheep should be a lot easier, and admittedly I said that I would do this off camera, but hey, here we are. Anyway, just grab some wool now, and I'll be back once I'm ready to start actually making my conduits. And yes, I promise that this time we'll actually do as I said I would do. Alright, between episodes I made myself some pulsating iron nuggets. You can make pulsating iron by putting iron and a ender pearl into an alloying furnace from Ender.io, and then you can just turn it into nuggets by crafting it on its own. Anyway, the pulsating iron nuggets are needed in the recipe for making item conduits, which is the first thing we're going to do right now. Item conduits allow me to transfer items between inventories, for example, between the various machines that we're going to use, so they're quite useful that way. Anyhow, to make them even more useful, we're going to need another set of items. Item filters, to be precise. So, I'm first going to need some hoppers and some paper, and so I'll be back once we have that. Anyway, a little later, I've got myself 12 filters, which should be enough for what I'm going to do. There's a catch though. Remember that I'm planning to make stuff rot in order to get the dirt I need? Yeah, the thing about that is, to filter out stuff that can rot, I need an advanced filter, but to get that I need solarium, and to get solarium I need soul sand from the nether. The nether is a horrible, horrible place in this pack, and if I can avoid going there, I gladly will avoid going there. Speaking of horrible things, winter. Winter in this pack sucks. That aside, let's get started actually routing the stuff that's coming from the farms into the system. To do that, we're going to use those item conduits that I made, and we're going to use drawers to store everything in. The advantage of drawers is that they can store a lot of one item, so they're pretty useful for this purpose. Anyway, all the stuff that comes in there will next go into the item conduits, and then either go into that drawer controller, which will sort it further into one of the connected drawers, or it will go into the chest. Since we can't just filter out all the sweet potatoes, because again I'd need some advanced filter for that, we're going to use a different trick. Basically, we're going to put as much as possible into the drawers via the drawer controller, and everything that doesn't have a drawer it can fit in will instead go into the chest. In theory that should mean just the sweet potatoes, which lets me access them whenever I need them to. But in practice it might also mean anything that happens to slip into the system because of reasons. Yeah. Anyway, the next thing I have to do is to prepare the filter on the insertion point that goes into the drawer controller with the items that can go into it. So I'm gonna need a sugar cane, and I'm gonna need some canola seeds. Other than that, it's just a matter of going into the GUI and putting the proper items into the proper slots. Simple as that. Note, however, that I set the priority on this insertion point to be much higher than the one on the chest there. So, effectively, the conduits will first try to insert into the drawer controller, like I mentioned already, and only then we'll try to put it into the chest, whatever it happens to be. All in all, that should be everything that needs to be done on this side of the room for the time being. So now we can get started working on the actual mechanisms that will use the stuff that we're harvesting and sorting over here. Oh, and before I forget to mention, I'll have to check inside the chest on top, this one, at least once per Minecraft day to make sure that the items inside actually turn into rotten food. If I don't check, they'll just build up more and more rot over time, and they won't actually turn into rotten food until you look at them. Some kind of weird quantum rot, really. Anyway, that lame joke aside, I'll be back once I have the stuff I need for the next step. Okay. The central purpose of this greenhouse is to start making ethanol crystals. Ethanol crystals are an important fuel source that I'm going to use a lot going forward. To make them, I'm first of all going to need a simple furnace to cook up something that comes out of this fermenter. More specifically, to make ethanol crystals, I need to cook up sludge. How do I make sludge? Well, pretty straightforward. I just put yeast and some kind of plant material in a fermenter. That already means that I'm going to need another fermenter, because the only way to make yeast that can be used there is indeed in a fermenter by using sugar and dirt. Now, sugar is easy enough to get, but dirt is a little more involved, because we're going to need one of these auto-crafting units. Previously, in the last season, I used an Ender IO crafter, or auto-crafter, I kind of forgot about the exact name, but I'm not going to be able to do that this time around, for pretty much the same reason as to why I can't use an advanced item filter at this point in time. they require those Z-logic controllers, and Z-logic controllers require solarium. And to make solarium I have to go to the Nether, which is a very unpleasant place to be. Anyhow, the general process is going to be rotten food goes into the rotary crafter, the dirt that comes out goes into the first fermenter, the yeast that comes out of the first fermenter goes into the second one, and finally the sludge that comes out of the second fermenter will go into the furnace. Simple as that. The first problem we are going to run into, however, is that rotary craft is a bit peculiar about what side you put power into. For example, the auto crafting unit doesn't really care. It's one of the few items you can put power into just about any side and it'll work just fine. But the fermenters, for example, specifically need their power into the back. Additionally, to get the auto crafting unit to work, we're going to need to tell it to make a certain item a certain way by use of those crafting patterns. Crafting patterns are thankfully really cheap to make, so that's no hair of my back. But yeah, we still gotta make them first, otherwise we'll have no use for this entire system. So I'll just get started with that right now, and I'll be back once I'll have the initial setup more or less complete. See ya! Okay, first up, between takes I found out that sugar does not have a regular crafting recipe anymore. Instead you have to put sugarcane into a grinder in order to get sugar. We'll fix that in a moment. Also, I managed to make myself a set of crafting patterns and made one for dirt. As you can see, it just slots in there, and once we power this thing up, I'm sure it'll produce all the dirt that we'll need, so long as we keep feeding it rotten food. Which is kind of a disgusting thing to say, but anyway. I'm just going to lock down this drawer on top and tell it to only hold rotten food and dirt, because apparently the auto crafting unit requires an attached inventory with the relevant ingredients in order to actually do its work. If you don't provide the ingredients via a different inventory, it can't do anything. Anyway, the next thing we're gonna have to start working on is to hook up power and, more importantly, water into this room, because the fermenters do require water in order to operate. So I'll just have to run a quick pipe from the water collection facility just outside all the way back into the fermenter. Let's get on with that, and I'll be right back. Off camera I visited my old Season 1 world because I was having some trouble remembering exactly how I did everything, and there I noticed I used these heat lamps with the fermenters. The reason for that is simply because the fermenters are extremely sensitive to the surrounding temperature, but the heat lamps make for a very simple way to manage exactly how hot or how cold they are. As such, rather than doing things the hard way with lots of fire or cooling fins, I'm just putting heat lamps on there and copying in the appropriate temperatures. Making yeast goes fastest at 28 degrees centigrade, and as we'll see in a moment, making sludge works best at 32. Anyhow, I've also set up this conduit to pull out stuff from the top via the lime green channel, which is going to be only yeast, and to insert that back in here, so that one channel can both carry the sugar canes and the yeast needed to make actual ethanol. I also hooked up a simple DC electric engine so I could run the fermenters for a little while and make one copy of the image of the item that I'm going to be requiring from that particular fermenter. As you may have noticed, words are hard. In any case, now that I have some sludge ready for use, I can start hooking things up for a quick test run to see if everything goes where it's supposed to go. Sugarcane into the grinder, and once the grinder fills up, the rest of the sugarcane, as it should, shows up in the fermenter. So that's at least one thing working as it should. Next thing we've got to do is to provide each of these items with enough power in the form of rotary energy to actually run, and that's kind of the difficult part. For now though, I'm just going to quote-unquote manually run these fermenters because I need a little more ethanol to get started with the system I have in mind. So I'll be babysitting this for a while, and I'll be back once things are ready to proceed. Quick aside for something that I just recently discovered. In Rotarycraft you're gonna need a lot of HSLA steel, which is relatively simple to make in a blast furnace with some lava, but sometimes you end up in a place where the air is too cold or whatever, but you still need HSLA steel. As it turns out, you can just set a heat lamp to 601 degrees centigrade and the blast furnace will run 24/7, no interruptions, no variations. To be quite frank, I think it's a little overpowered, but hey, I'm not going to complain and I'm gonna keep using this exploit, if it even is an exploit. I mean, for crying out loud. Reka made both of those mods, both Chromaticraft and Rotarycraft, so if he intended for this particular interaction, I'm not gonna complain. Alright, back at the industrial greenhouse, and the machine is starting to really take full. Off screen, I, for starters, placed down everything in the semi-final configuration, and I made myself those two gasoline engines. Gasoline engines run on ethanol crystals, which is what we're making here, but basically, between the two of them that are in use here, the final production of this machine is going to be much, much higher. So we'll be able to keep them both running at all times, use a whole bunch of ethanol crystals elsewhere, and still have a net gain. Anyway, next up, the furnace. The furnace is going to be powered by the friction heater against the back, as you can see right here. The reason why the furnace is off the ground like this is simply because vanilla Minecraft demands that you pull out cooked stuff out the bottom and insert stuff to cook in the top, so yeah, I just needed a block free underneath. Anyway, all that really remains now is to hook up the last few things, make sure that it's all ready to go, and then put in some ethanol into those two those two machines. So, I'll see you again once all of this is up and running. Hopefully, anyway. You never know with complicated machinery like this, right? As you can already see, things didn't quite work out as expected and I had to add a few more things. In this case, it turned out that the grinders from Rotarycraft have a higher torque requirement than what the gasoline engines can produce. So I have to use a gearing mechanism in order to turn some of the speed that the engines produce into torque instead. It's thankfully not too complicated, but it does mean that I have to add in some piping to provide lubricant to those gearing mechanisms, because otherwise they break down and over time I won't be able to actually pull lubricant from the system. I kind of predicted this would have happened, which is also why I made those canola seeds, because you need to put canola seeds into a grinder in order to make lubricant, but yeah, it's still kind of a daft thing to forget about, don't you agree? Any case, other than that little hiccup there, I think I now have pretty much everything that needs to be set as it should be. All that's left to do is to hook up the engines to the network of item conduits, so I can pull out ethanol crystals and put them into the engines. I'll also have to set up some measures to prevent the wrong stuff from going the wrong way. In this case, dirt ended up in the storage system, which is not what I want. And yeah, I'll need a storage place for the excess ethanol crystals, because again, that's the end goal of what we're doing here, to get as much ethanol as possible. So, since I don't want stuff to go in there, I'll just turn off that particular connection. And like I already said once, but I'll say it again, we should be good to go. But I'm not going to put those in just yet. The general idea that I have right now is to first start up this grinder so I can make some lubricant and keep those gearboxes from breaking down. Because the more damage they get, the less effective they'll be, and it really doesn't take long before they simply do not have the efficiency needed to keep those grinders running. Anyway, since I'm also planning on using the lubricant made here for other purposes than just keeping the machines here going, I also made myself a couple of Rotary Craft reservoirs. Basically, they're just Rotary Craft's way of holding on to a store of some liquid or some gases if you add some glass to keep the tops covered. And yeah, I'm going to use those in order to store the overflow of lubricant that's going to be produced here, because lubricant surprisingly lasts a very long time. I just need to figure out a way to properly hook this up and yeah, be able to use it in other parts of the system as well. So, this should be working, probably won't be because that's my luck. Let's get this started, and you can see that immediately I get the achievement, grind my gears, because I'm damaging that particular gearbox. The moment that I make some lubricant, however, which is right about now, there we go. The moment I make some lubricant, however, it should get pulled out of the grinder and go into there, but there's a slight snag there too. As it turns out, the connection has to be from the side of the grinder, not the top. Did I mention that Rotary Craft is a bit finicky about what side you connect stuff to? Anyway, as you can see there, it now connects. And the lubricant is freely flowing into the gearbox, so now it won't take any damage while it's running. Thing is, we'll still have to repair that little bit of damage that went into it while we were waiting for the first lube to be made, so let's get on with that next. Alright, to repair the damage to that gearbox, all we really need to do is to make some gears from Rotary Craft, some HSLA gears, and right click them on the gearbox. Simple as that, and the damage is down to 0%. Again, so long as there's at least a drop of lube in that system, it won't take any damage whatsoever. Anyway, off screen I also filled up that second gasoline engine, but for some reason the lube isn't quite flowing as it should, so let's fix that next. Apparently the reservoirs are taking all the lube from the sides and letting none pass on through to the bottom, so all we really have to do is connect up a few pipes along the bottom of the reservoir, and the other gearbox managing the other grinder, remember the grinder that makes sugar, should also be up and running. So why is this not working right now? Let's see. Oh, there we go. It's running now. So, as you can see, the grinder is slowly making sugar for us. The sugar then gets pulled out and put into the fermenter over here, which it indeed did. That's then turned into yeast. The yeast goes into the other fermenter, and if we take a moment, sludge appears into the furnace, and we're making ethanol crystals. Now, for now, the ethanol crystals go straight into the gasoline engines and will build up in there until their internal buffer is completely full. Should take a while since the fermenters are running at a pretty low speed. The sugar making grinder can keep up pretty well at this point, but yeah, there's actually quite a bit more to be had there. We'll get to that some other time. For now though, we're actually building up a fair bit of power into these two engines, and well, I'll have to babysit this setup for a while to make sure that both engines keep running the entire time. One of them stops running for a while, the other half of the system will get backlogged and everything will freeze. But yeah, other than that, we're doing pretty well. I'll also have to do something with those canola husks, but yeah, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'll just put them into a drawer, set the drawer up so that it throws away the excess, and we're good. There we go, all the empty canola husks are pulled out, and if we look over here, they're in the drawer. Now, I ran into the problem that I wasn't producing enough sugarcane, so off screen I upgraded the sugarcane seeds and they're doing better now. I also replaced the hoppers with those floating hopper hawks and those droppers underneath, because a lot of things would get stuck on the edge of the hoppers and would just not get picked up at all. The hopper hawks just pick up anything that's near them, so that fixes that problem. Anyway, next thing I want to fix is that now I might end up with more stuff in the drawers than I really need, and I don't want to keep everything running if it's not absolutely necessary, so I'm going to work on making sure that these clutches get a redstone signal when they need to shut down for a while, because the crop that they're growing is just not necessary. I've already upgraded the drawers with a mod to produce a redstone signal when they're starting to fill up. So the next thing I'm gonna do is to dig out a little basement and get stuff ready to wire it up. And we're back. Off camera I upgraded the drawers to emit redstone signals as they fill up, and I've dug out this basement. In here I'm going to put the control system that will turn off the farms as they fill up. I've also added a bunch of insulated redstone conduit from the clutches that can turn off the fans that harvest the crops, and routed it all the way to here, which by the way is on pretty much the other side of the farm lanes. Anyway, I also made myself some potentiometers from Draconic Evolution, which are very useful items, but they are very expensive for me at this point. The fact that I could make two was already a bit luck for me here. Anyway, the way they work is that you can set them to any value between 0 and 15, and they'll emit a constant redstone signal at that level. The general idea here is to compare the redstone signals those potentiometers give against the redstone signals from the drawers, and if it's above one, then it shuts off the farm. If it's below the other, then it'll turn the farm back on again until the drawer fills back up and the farm has to be turned off again. Okay, it took some struggling, it took some puzzling, but I think I have the system more or less usable right now. It at least looks like it's working. Anyway, signal from the potentiometer is coming in. It's being transferred to the comparators. The comparators are receiving strong signals from all sides because otherwise they'll behave a bit unpredictably. And yeah, the yellow line and the lime green line are inputs from the drawers upstairs. The white and black line are reference inputs from the potentiometers. The comparators subtract those two numbers, and if the output from the back is stronger than the output from the side, they give an output on the front. The RS NOR latches, the ones with the funny loops you see, which you see right here, then toggle based on which side gets powered first, and stay that way until the other side gets powered. That way I get a steady output that says either if the farm should keep running or if it should shut down. So, now that I have a working system as best I can tell, all I have to do now is to hook up the output signals from the RS NOR latches along the green and orange channels to the clutches that let the fan run or not run. So, I'll get right on with that and I'll be back in a second. Alright, a little bit later, the line to connect with the farm is in. The quite clear glass is also in, and as you can see it's really very clear. It's almost like I'm walking on nothing at all. But yeah, next thing to do, configure the clutches and the system should be up and running. And with that all done, now the fans should turn off when the relevant crop is already fully stocked in the storage system. As you can see, some of the canola seeds got stuck in the upper sorting chest because the canola drawer filled up all the way. And if we look out here, you can now see that the canola seed doesn't get harvested. The yellow flowers just stick around, the fans are deactivated. At the same time, the sugarcane is still being harvested because the chest is not full yet. So, while the canola seed is being processed, we now just have a system that at least partially shuts down once the storage for that particular resource is completely full. And we've got automated ethanol production. So now it's time to actually do something useful with that. So, let me grab what I need for that, I'll be right back. So, a little while of crafting later, and I've made myself this little setup here. 4 gasoline engines leading into an extractor, the rotary craft way of multiplying ores. However, to properly operate it, we'll need those 2 steel gearboxes to be lubed up, and currently with only one grinder grinding away at the canola seeds and making lubricant for no less than 4 gearboxes already, it's going to take a while, especially since, for whatever reason, only the left gearbox is being lubricated right now and the right one not at all. I imagine it'll have to fill up the first one before it can go to the other one. So yeah, let me just skip the time to the point where I can start using this thing. Alright, off screen I was doing some experimenting and I accidentally destroyed a steel gearbox and had to replace it. That was fun. Basically, every shaft and gearbox has a certain strength, and I ended up putting too much torque onto that one gearbox, so it exploded. Not fun. In any case, I'm now keeping the one furthest from the extractor in speed mode, and we'll talk about that one in a second. The extractor has 4 stages, and each stage has their own speed and torque requirements. Right now, I'm not able to provide enough speed and torque at the same time to run all 4 stages simultaneously. The first and last stage I can meet if I need to, and I can meet the requirements for the middle 2 stages, but not all at the same time. So for now, what I'm doing is I let it run through the first stage until so it builds up some dust. Then I flip over this gearbox from speed mode to torque mode, or vice versa. With both of them in speed mode, I get 16 times the speed that I originally put in, but only 1/16 of the torque that was put in by the gasoline engines. If I flip the second gearbox back to torque mode, I effectively get, well, times 4 then divided by 4 the speed, and divided by 4 then times 4 the torque. In other words, the same speed and torque as that I originally put in. It's a bit complicated, but the short version is I need to use 2 gearboxes to be able to switch between 16 times speed and 1 times speed. And all in all, it works. It works pretty well. So, yeah, I now have 5 times ore processing. Ha! Alright, now that we've got that up and running, I think it's about time we start to wrap up this episode, but first, let's do a little bit of an experiment. See, as part of processing iron ore via the extractor, you sometimes get these tungsten flakes. They're a bit hard to get, sure, but they're needed for some of the higher level stuff. So I set up a quick and dirty test setup to see if I can smelt them into proper ingots, which, as shown here, requires use of the friction heater at 1300 degrees centigrade. Almost 1400 even. Sadly, the friction heater, operated by one engine, can only output up to 800 degrees right about. So yeah, from the looks of it, this little setup isn't going to cut it. Oh well, guess we'll have to come back to that some other time when I have something better to use for this, huh? That said, it is high time I wrap up this episode too, so thank you all for watching, sorry for all the delays, and yeah, next time I'm going to make myself some better equipment so I can actually go to the Nether, despite my recent vehement objections against going to the Nether. So yeah, next time we're making guns. For now, see you all, hopefully soon. Bye.